Thank you all for attending today. I'm really excited about the wonderful panel we have up here for you. My name is John Abbott. As Sean mentioned, I work in the communications office here at the USPTO. But today my role is to do less communicating and do my best to stay out of the way of these wonderful experts that we have on the stage. So with me today I have Jamila Corbett, Dana Goldstein, and Eldon Hawks. They each have varied expertise and a ton of things to share with us today, but I'm going to let them do the introducing of themselves because they will do a much better job of it than I will. So starting with Jamila, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, your experience, and how you got into the funding space?
Sure. Thank you for allowing me to be here. My name is Jamila Corbett. I'm part of the team at Established, and we help organizations with their startup, communication, and innovation strategies. Some of our clients include Capital One, GuideWell, CES. We also have some federal clients, which include SBA, NASA, Air Force, and others. I can't remember them all, but I lead some of our work with our federal clients and the people that write the checks for those innovators. We also have a startup community called Startup of the Year. You can visit that, startupofyear.com. And through that, we have an investment arm called Established Ventures. And so with our startup community, we connect founders and rising startups with investors and mentors and help them expand their network. So personally, I'm an entrepreneur at heart. I bootstrapped my business. I saved up about $40,000 in my 20s. Quit my job and did that for 7 years, and believe you me, $40,000, I thought I was rich. So it was a very interesting time. And so I understand the grit, the grind, the struggle, because my degree was in English. So all the business stuff that I know now, I learned it trial by fire. So I'm very grateful to be here with you all today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dana Goldstein. Really delighted to be with you all today. I was also an English major undergrad, so I think there's a lot of potential in getting that, humanities-oriented degree and then moving on into business. I'm a two-time entrepreneur. I have one issued patent. I can tell you that story at some point. So understand the value of IP, of innovation, of being able to protect that IP and innovation. And after exiting my second company, I joined a local incubator, the organization called Halcyon. We're just across the river in Georgetown. And we have been incubating impact-driven businesses from around the world since 2014. So we have a real focus on fairly similar things, actually, to establish, and we have a great relationship with Startup of the Year, to be able to help entrepreneurs get to a point where they're commercializing their inventions, getting products to market, figuring out how to build scalable businesses around product ideas and around finding product market fit. I lead our investment arm. We have a small fund, venture capital fund, so happy to speak to that facet of things, and also run an angel network called Halcyon Angels. So delighted to be here with you all and with this awesome panel, and I'll turn it over to Eldon.
Thank you, Dana. Unlike my two colleagues, my bachelor's is not in English. It's in marine science and environmental science. But I am Eldon Hawks. I'm the Partnership and Innovation Specialist at the Small Business Administration, working out of the Office of Innovation and Investment. I specifically specialize with the Small Business Innovation Research Program and Small Business Technology Transfer Program. I kind of just fell into this whole SBIR TTR world. I ended up, I've been in the world for about 11 to 12 years now. I was first at the Department of Agriculture, helping to assist and then running their SBIR program, and then transitioning over to the SBA, where I'm now the program manager for our Federal Technology Partnership Program, where it's a competitive grant program where we give funds to states and state organizations to develop programs to assist small businesses in order to win and just learn about SBIR's TTR.
Thank you all for those introductions. And as long as we're sharing, I have a history degree, so I don't know if that's helpful to anybody, but it is interesting to see, kind of where we start isn't exactly always where we end up going, which is, I think, a next segue into our first question. And we're going to start with Dana on this one, actually. Speaking of getting started, what kind of funding is out there? What should people be looking for?
So there's a ton of funding out there, depending on what type of company you have, what type of product or service you're trying to commercialize. And I'll do this at a relatively high level, and we can dig into anything that's of interest. But fundamentally, I would argue that the best form of funding is revenue. If you have a product that you're ready to sell, go out and sell it. That money obviously comes into your organization. It means that you're not taking on debt, which I'll get into in a second. It means that you're not giving anything up to get an equity investment, which I'll also get into. But it also shows that there is a market for your product. So if you're in a position to be able to start commercializing and start selling, revenue is a phenomenal source of funding. Frequently, particularly if you're doing something that is deep tech, that's hard science, there's going to be a fairly significant R&D period to get to a point where you're able to start selling a product. And in that case, there are a ton of grants out there, and there are others up here who are probably better positioned to talk. I'm not looking specifically at you, but I'm looking specifically at you about SBIRs and STTRs. And grants are what's called non-dilutive funding. Non-dilutive means that you're not giving up any ownership in your company in exchange for taking on a grant. With a grant, you'll have reporting requirements that can sometimes be a little bit onerous, but you're not giving anything up monetarily in order to get that funding in. That's a phenomenal source of funding for R&D. It gets much harder to do as you're getting to a point where you're commercializing your product. At that point, loans are certainly an option. It's pretty hard for early stage companies to get loans. Banks in particular want to see several years of operating history. But with a loan, if you're taking on debt, there are also going to be payments that go along with that. So there are costs and benefits to each form of funding. The world where I sit is equity funding. So angel investors, venture capital, and that's a bit of a different model. It's a model where investors are saying, all right, I'm going to put sometimes a significant amount of money into your company. In exchange for that, I'm going to take part ownership of your company. So the exchange there is, with a bank, it's we're going to take in money, we'll pay back that money with interest. That's what the bank gets out of it. For investors, what they get out of it is that they own something or own a portion of something that they think is going to get really big, that you think is going to get really big, and that at some point will have an exit opportunity. So it'll be acquired by a bigger company, maybe it'll go public. So the incentives and the structures get fairly different as you get into bigger companies and as you think about the process of potentially giving up equity for in exchange for an investment in your company. And do you want to talk a little bit about grants?
This does not like me today. Thank you. Sure, thank you, Dana. Now, one of the things that Dana brought up was the possibility of grants and grant funding. One of the things about America's Seed Fund, powered by SBIR STTR, is that it is both grants and contracts. The federal government has, on average, about $4 billion of funding available to entrepreneurs spread across 11 different agencies, and then it's broken up even further from there. It's not spread out equally. A lot of it's DOD, but there's certain thresholds as far as R&D funding that each agency has to meet before they can offer an SBIR, then an STTR program. Now, depending on the agency that you are looking to get funding with, the technology can either be very specific to their needs. A lot of the contracting agencies, they're looking for very specific technologies that they're trying to fund and ultimately commercialize for their own benefits, and that'll typically end up in a sole source contract. Then you have the granting agencies. Typically, granting agencies are very open-ended as to what technology they're looking to fund. With SBIR itself, there are 3 specific phases. As a basic skeleton for the program that may change depending on the agency. Some have additional phase 2, some have supplemental director phase 2s. It all depends on the agency, but phase 1 is always proof of concept. You come to that agency based on the technology you have, based on technology you're looking for, you apply through their application methods. Now again, each agency can be a bit different with both the application process as well as the review process, depending on the agency. Some do in-house reviews, some do exterior reviews with peer reviews and subject matter experts. But phase 1 is all about proof of concept. And that can be anywhere from, I believe it's 60, so I think the max is about $600,000. I may be a bit off, and it changes a little bit every year. Agencies revise what their totals are. Once you successfully complete a phase 1, you're then eligible for a phase 2. Now, phase 2 is typically 24 months, depending on the agency, and that can be anywhere from $600,000 to, I believe it's $2.5 million. Now, as I said before, some agencies do offer a supplemental phase 2B, so that's an additional phase 2 before you get to that phase 3. Some offer direct to phase 2, whereas you are too advanced for phase one, but not quite at phase two. So you get funding directly to go to phase two. Now with the phase three is all about commercialization. SBIR, TTR is all about commercialization, regardless of what that looks like. As Dana talked about before, what's your exit strategy? You know, are you looking to be acquired by a company? Are you looking to simply develop a patent and license it? What is your exit strategy? What are you looking to commercialize? And that is the main goal of SBIR's TTR. Now, with phase three, with granting agencies, there isn't any funding from the granting agencies. Granting agencies don't typically purchase any sort of technology services that are created using their SBIR, STR funding. However, with the contracting agencies, that's where you have that opportunity for that sole source contract as part of phase three, because you are directly developing a project that's specifically geared to the needs of that agency. And they go into that funding cycle looking to ultimately purchase it for their needs when everything is said and done.
Yeah, and if I can add to that, SBIR, STTR funding is really good, especially if you have a very risky technology. Oftentimes, these agencies will invest in that technology, and by doing that, it opens up a whole new world, because investors will come in and be like, oh yeah, well the government already invested in, and they took all the risk. I'm going to come in and follow on that investment and provide more money. And of course, I'm partial to the bootstrapping route because I was a bootstrapper, but I've realized that bootstrapping isn't for everyone, especially if you're an innovator and have a very long technical path ahead of you, like Dana said. So if you can't go the bootstrap route, I would suggest going the SBIR, STTR route. And also something to consider when you're looking to fundraise is that fundraising takes a long time. It takes a long time, and so you have to go into that thinking, okay, this is how much I need. Maybe your magic number is $1 million. Okay, you know, if you have $1 million, you can hire the people you want, you can build the technology, but think about it in a phased approach. So as a bootstrapper, I was forced to think about things in a phased approach. And if you haven't read this book by Damon John, one of my favorite bootstrappers of all time, Power of Broke, it teaches you to be very creative. So if you can look at your funding through a phased approach, you can say, okay, $1 million is my goal to achieve everything, but what can I do with $10,000? And I remember when I got my first $10,000 check, first of all, I was like, oh yeah, we cooking with gas now, because that was big. That was huge for me at the time. I'm in my 20s. I had very little expenses, roommates, eating ramen noodles. So I could afford to be a little bit more risky with everything. But once I got that money, then of course I had to set aside some money for my own expenses, but then I used that money to grow my company. And then one $10,000 check led to the next, and of course I increased my prices because I did undersell myself. And that was my personal journey. But again, if you're an innovator looking for funding, then again, think about it in a phased approach, because oftentimes when you get that SBIR or STTR funding, it shouldn't be your only source of funding. And the agencies will tell you, because sometimes the government take a long time to cut that check. But you still need that oxygen, because money, cash flow is oxygen. So you have to think about how else can I get some money, and how can I use the money that I have?
Great. Thank you all for those answers. I think we touched on some of the wave tops of some of the things we're going to dive into a little bit more deeply, so I appreciate that. That was a nice overview to start with. But Jamila, I think you brought up a great point that's a nice segue into our next question. At what point should someone start, or an investor... Let me start that question all over again. History degree, not English, like I said. At what point should someone start looking for an investor or funding?
I'm going to answer that question in two parts, because you should look for funding first, because you need funding to do anything. You need funding for an LLC, you need funding for a patent, you need funding for a domain. So immediately, look for funding immediately. You have an idea, start trying to raise maybe a friends and family round. And I'm sure Dana can speak to the different rounds of funding, because she's angel investor, and usually she follows on with that friends and family round. But immediately, that's the short answer to the first part of the question. Second part, investors. There's certain milestones. It varies by each company, depending on what your company is. But there are certain milestones or indicators that'll let you know that you're ready for funding. Number one, maybe you have a proof of concept. So you have a I was about to say most valuable player, minimum viable product, which is your most valuable player. I'm a sports person. So you have your MVP. You'll hear this term a lot in the startup world. You have an MVP and you have some traction. You have some stickiness to it, and you have that product market fit. And so oftentimes the market is going to market. The market is not going to lie. The market will tell you exactly what the market wants. And if you can have that sweet spot, that's what we call product market fit. So if you have, that's a good indicator that, okay, I have something, but now I need some more money. I need some more money to continue building this thing. And with that said, I'm going to turn it over to Dana because I'm interested in hearing her answer.
That was awesome. So some of it depends on the type of business, and it depends on kind of where you are in the development. I think as somebody who is in angel investing and is a venture capitalist, I think there's a lot of maybe mythology around venture capital. I think a lot of companies start and think, all right, what I need to do is go and raise a big round of venture capital financing. And venture capital is not going to be the right fit for every type of company. So starting with something like an SBIR, if you're able to bootstrap, if you have the ability and the means to, go to a rich uncle or whatever the case may be, to get a little bit of very friendly financing in so that you can get to that product market fit, that goes a very long way. But I'll tell you a little bit about what investors are looking for, and just very briefly the difference between angel investors and venture capitalists who are professional investors. Angel investors are called angels because they're the people who come in and write a check for you when nobody else will. So it's this like critical money that's going to help get you to the next stage of your development. In some cases, that will be somebody who is maybe just beyond friends and family, but somebody who is investing because they believe in you. They have seen how you've been developing the product. They've seen multiple iterations. They've seen how you've been able to leverage the SBIR funding that you were able to get. Even if you weren't able to get SBIR funding, they've seen how you've developed the product over time. And they believe that you're going to be able to take this to the next stage. A lot of angels are investing because they've been there. They've been entrepreneurs, or they've been early employees at big companies, and they had exits where they got a bunch of money back, and they want to help people who are at a stage that they were at. That can be incredibly, incredibly valuable money. There are frequently people who also want to get involved in your business, and that can be fantastic. If you've invented something, maybe you've never built a company before, and that's okay. If you can bring people sort of around you who have built companies before so that you can leverage their experience, you can learn from them, you can tap their networks, and angels can play a really, really critical role there. Venture capital is a little bit of a different beast. So venture capital firms are taking other people's money and then investing that money. So there's a need for venture capital firms to return money that is significantly more than the money that they've raised to their investors. So there are just different dynamics around what a venture capitalist is going to want to see in a company. So they'll absolutely want to see that product market fit, or as far along towards product market fit as you can be. But they're also going to want to see that there is a clear path to significant growth for your company. And what I mean by significant growth is, you've maybe heard people talk about kind of hockey stick revenue. Revenue that is going up and to the right at a very, very steep curve, so that when you are thinking about whatever an exit might look like, whether it's an acquisition or going public, that the amount of money that you're returning to your investors is 10 times, 20 times the amount of money that they've put in. In order for somebody to take that bet, having something be de-risked by, say, SBIR, STTR funding is phenomenal. They want to see that product market fit. They want to see that you're starting to generate some revenue. And there are investors who will invest at different stages. But I think it's important to understand two things from this. One is that venture capital is not the best form of funding for a lot of ventures. And it's okay if you never go and raise venture capital. If you're able to bring in other types of capital to get you where you want to go with your business, fantastic. And two is that the incentives that venture capitalists have are going to be a little bit different from individual investors, and certainly different from other people who might be putting capital into your company.
Thank you for all of that. So, of course, we're here at the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. We love our intellectual property. And Dana, I think you mentioned you have a little bit of experience with patents. So, question for the entire panel, but I think we'll kick it over to Dana first, is how does intellectual property help in securing funding?
I'll start really quickly and then pass it off to my colleagues. Just very quickly, my story. I joked, and I'm not sure it's a joke, but I think I may have the longest time from submitting an application to actually getting an issued patent. I'm not sure. It was a 10-year horizon. hopefully for all of you, it won't take that long. We had sort of a pre-Alice, post-Alice complication with things, but intellectual property, and particularly doing something like getting a patent can take, hopefully not as long as it took my company to get our issued patent, but it can take a while. Generally speaking, you're not going to be in a position to have something that is a fully buttoned down, protected idea when you're going to raise money. It's relatively rare, at least at the stage that we invest, which is at a seed stage, that there's already an issued patent. It can happen sometimes. What's important about it, though, from an investor perspective, is that if you have a patent application, if you're putting together a patent application, if you have an approach to protecting trade secrets, not everything necessarily needs to be patented, it can be a way to signal to investors that you're thinking about the defensibility of what you're doing, that you're doing something that's creating a competitive moat around your business. So, if I'm looking at a company and I think, hey, that's really interesting, but there's nothing that's protectable in what this company is doing, somebody else could come in with maybe more funding and eat their lunch. That's not going to be an exciting investment opportunity. If I'm looking at a company and I say, what they're doing here is unique. They maybe don't have a patent on it. Patents are hard to defend for startups. They maybe don't have a patent, but they're thinking really clearly about how they're putting some defensive walls around their intellectual property that very much changes the equation. So I would definitely encourage you to think about whether a patent is the right thing to pursue if you have something that's patentable, but whether or not you do, what's your strategy for defending whatever it is that makes your offering unique?
And Dana, you hit the nail on the head, and I want to expand on that because if you're just starting out, maybe you don't have the resources to defend your intellectual property, which is very important. So maybe you should consider partnering with the university in a STTR program so that they can defend it, or even partnering with the manufacturer because they have the resources to defend it. And speaking of stories, one of our startups in our startup community, Startup of the Year, startupofyear.com, if you want to join, for all of those out there in the audience, quick plug. His name is Robbie Cabral, and he's the inventor of Benji Lock. So Benji Lock he invented this lock that you use your fingerprint and you can open the lock. And this is back when biometrics was just really taking off into the market. And we invited him to CES, and he partnered with a lock company because he had the idea, he had the IP, but he didn't necessarily have the resources to bring that idea to market. So he partnered with the manufacturer, and he was able to produce these locks. We invited him to CES, and the Sharks, somebody from Shark Tank was there. One of these Shark Tank scouts, he ended up going on Shark Tank and landing a deal, and that's all because he had the intellectual property. So it's important, but try to think about, okay, I have this IP, how can I defend it, and who can I partner with if I don't have the resources to defend it?
So one of the things that was mentioned was really about defending it, but also it's about lending credibility to your technology with that patent. Now with SBIR's TTR, it is not necessary when you apply to have the patent, but from sitting in review panels for over 8+ years and hearing the conversations and even being a reviewer myself, especially as a program from the time I started in 2012 and shifting to now, the aspect of commercialization is become more and more of a focus even in phase one. And when an applicant is coming with a patent, or even they are partnering, say with, by the time of USDA, a lot of people partner with USDA labs and other federal labs to build upon established patents. That lends an air of credibility to the technology area you're looking to fund. And you are more likely than someone who doesn't have a patent, or at least a partnership with a patent, to get funded because there's a lot more credibility, there's a lot more data behind what you're trying to do as well, because that patent exists also.
And quick question for you, Eldon, really quick, because when you're working with the government, I know some innovators out there like, oh, is the government going to take my IP? And so can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. The government owns nothing. You come to the government. It is $4 billion in non-dilutive funding. It takes no equity in your business. It don't take any sort of IP. They have no rights to your data at the end of the day. The only thing the government is looking for, you have a great idea. If it's a contract, we can use it. We want to fund it. If you meet all your milestones, then you have a golden ticket for a sole source contract at the end. If it's granting, it's, hey, this is a great idea. This will serve our research mission. This will serve the public with whom we are charged with assisting. And then you get to phase 3, have fun commercializing. Do well. But after that, the government has no sort of claim to what you're doing when it comes to IP, nor when it comes to data, nor do the government take a stake in your business.
So in short, Uncle Sam isn't going to put his hands in your pocket.
No. If that's the case, 23andMe would be cutting Uncle Sam a very big check right now. Same thing with Qualcomm, same thing with Systematic. These are all companies who we know, especially 23andMe in the past couple of years, who receive funding from SBIR's TTR.
Do you know the percentage of, and I know, I'm sorry, John.
You're doing a great job. I'm just here for the ride. Please.
Do you know the percentage of companies that have been funded by the SBIR STTR program over the 41-plus year history?
I don't know the percentage. It's been a lot. We're talking about every year at least 4,000 companies, if I remember correctly, are funded every single year, and that's amongst all of the 11 agencies that participate in the program. So, talking about 40 times 40 years, well, it's grown since the initial start 40 years ago, but that's a whole lot of companies that produce technology that you probably don't know you use every single day.
So from a venture capital perspective, we love looking at companies that have gone through SBIR, STTR, because from our perspective, it means that you've used non-dilutive funding to be able to, as Jamila said earlier, to de-risk your invention. So you've done a ton of tests, you've done some product testing, you've done some market testing, you've worked through all of the kinks in the product development. From a venture capital perspective, given the way the economics of venture capital work and what the expectations are, it's a very, very different pitch. From a founder perspective, it's a totally different pitch to say to investors, I want you to invest in something that I haven't totally figured out how the product works yet. I have a great idea, but I haven't totally figured out how the product works yet. Versus, not only is it a great idea, we've had this non-dilutive funding over the course of the last couple of years. We've gone through 6 different iterations. We fixed all of these things. We've started to put it in front of people. They like it. What we need money for now is to build out our sales team, to build out our infrastructure so that we can go make money. So that we love looking at companies that have already gone through that process because, as Jamila said, they're frequently de-risked. There's still a lot of risk in early companies, but on the product side of things, they're de-risked, which means that those companies are not going to be using our capital to de-risk their products.
Also, quick, because we are talking about non-dilutive funding, and maybe a lot of you all out there want to learn more about the SBIR STTR program. We're actually hosting, and our office is producing, along with the SBA, along with Eldon's office, is producing America's Seed Fund Week. So you can visit americasseedfund.us. That's americasseedfund.us to sign up for America's Seed Fund Week, where you're going to get introduced to the SBIR STTR programs and also hear from some of these companies that have received funding, because we have the Startup Expo, the America's Seed Fund Week Startup Expo, kicking off on Monday, May the 5th. That's the 15th. Yes, May the 15th. So americasseedfund.us to sign up for America's Seed Fund Week.
So you can take the weekend to not be at a conference and then go right back to a conference?
Great. Thank you for all that great discussion. I appreciate it. One moment. We can get to a question in just a minute. I want to do another quick plug as well. We talked about, obviously we're talking about funding. The idea of getting a patent and your intellectual property can be a little bit daunting. I want to just kind of put the shameless plug out there that there are a number of pro bono resources around the nation. So early investors and inventors that meet certain, innovators and inventors rather, that meet certain requirements and qualifications can actually get pro bono assistance for their intellectual property. And I think Dana, you mentioned that you availed yourself of some of that at one point?
I did, and I was very fortunate to be able to do it. It is certainly a barrier to entry that the legal fees for pursuing a patent can be really, really, really steep. I was very fortunate to be able to get phenomenal pro bono representation. I don't have the URL top of mind, but I know
I'm
the
happy to give it.
USPTO. There you go.
So that's uspto.gov/patent pro bono. Pretty simple and straightforward, but a great program to avail yourself of. I want to jump on to our next question. I saw some hands shoot up, and if we do have a few moments at the end, I will do my best to reach folks. But I think our panelists will also be hanging around in the room for a few minutes afterwards, so you can maybe snag them for a moment. I just volunteered you all for that. I hope you enjoy it. Next question: what should someone prepare to show a potential investor when seeking funding? And I think Eldon, you already started to answer this question a little bit, so I'll kick it back to you.
Sure. One of the things, especially with SBIR, you need to have some sort of data to back you up. One of the things with SBIR, and again, as I said before, that commercialization piece has become very critical even in stage 1 applications. When I first started at USDA, it was a paragraph in your application for phase 1. Now it's a whole page in there, pretty much having an understanding of where does your product, your technology, your service fit into the grand scheme of things as far as the business world, commercialization? Is there a market for it? Because one of the things that I believe this is probably the case amongst many, particularly granting agencies, when I first started, there was a question of a lot of technologies being funded. There was no demand for it. Like, this is a great idea. This is cool. Let's fund this science. You get to phase 1, you get to phase 2, crickets, no market. Or the market is totally moved by this technology in the time it took from phase 1 to phase 2, or someone else has come out with something better. So there's an increased aspect of having a small business or designing a small business to understand the potential marketplace for that technology. Now, obviously, phase 1 is just a page, but phase 2, you have a whole commercialization of reports that is part of your technical report. Because in phase 2, you've already demonstrated technology. You've demonstrated technology because you successfully completed that proof of concept in phase 1. Now you're looking to, okay, how does this fit into the market? And I think that's also going to be for any sort of angel investor or anyone else outside of the government. Where does this fit? Who's going to buy this? Who's your market? You know, and there are programs like the I-Corps program, which, you know, you get into it can assist you as well. There are other resources as well that help with market sources. But in today's competitive environment, when it comes to technology and innovation, you really want to know who's going to purchase your product or service all the way at the start. Because if you don't have a market, no one's going to want to fund you, because especially if you look at somebody as an investor who wants a return on their investment, they want to know, hey, when you finish, somebody's buying this. I'm getting my money back. Same thing with the federal government. They want to know, okay, if we're going to spend taxpayer dollars, what kind of economic generator is this going to be? Is this going to provide jobs? Is this going to be able to be on store shelves for someone to purchase? So now someone's buying this in their home. The grocery store is now generating income from that. The distributor, the manufacturer, the supplier, everyone's getting dollars off of the technology that was created via government funds. So we want to know there's an economic outcome and a positive. Jobs are created, money's created, economies are booming because of the technology that is created, or I should say funded through SBIR's TTR.
Thanks, Eldon. And you know, you mentioned that the government's primary interest in funding these things is contributing back to the overall economy. But a question for the panel, does having an investor mean giving up a part of your company, relinquishing control? What are some of the things to be aware of in that context?
So it depends a little bit on the type of investor and the type of investment. But fundamentally, if you are thinking about an equity investment where a venture capital fund, or in some cases even an angel investor, are putting significant capital into your company, it generally does mean giving up part ownership of the company. So, you know, if you're valuing your company, for example, at $900,000, I'm just going to keep the math simple, and an investor comes in and puts $100,000 into the company, the total value of your company at that point is $1 million. That investor owns 10% of your company. So that's something to think about. And there are lots of ways of getting capital in at an earlier stage using what's called convertible debt, so convertible notes or SAFEs, which are simple agreements for future equity. That typically happens more at an angel stage, maybe a seed stage. But if you're on the path where you're bringing in larger and larger checks from investors, you know, going from friends and family to angels to venture capital to a larger round of venture capital, yes, you are ultimately giving up some ownership in your company. How much ownership is a matter of negotiation, and that actually speaks very clearly. I loved your point, Jamila, about the progressive, sort of using different milestones, taking money in as you need it rather than taking in a lot of money at a time. You can manage and kind of negotiate that process by bringing in the capital that you need, getting to the next stage of growth or the next milestone, bringing in more capital at what's called a better valuation, which means that the money that you're taking in, you're giving up a relatively smaller portion of the company in exchange. But I guess I want to make 2 points about that overall. One is, if you end up owning 90% of your company, but the company is 10 times bigger than it would have been if you hadn't brought in capital, that to me is worth it. So it's a matter of figuring out kind of what that right balance is. And another really important point is that giving up ownership, so giving up an equity stake in your company, does not necessarily equate to giving up control of your company. It can, depending on how you negotiate, depending on how many successive rounds you end up raising, depending on how much ownership you end up raising, how much capital you end up raising. But ownership and control are two fairly different things. But fundamentally, the short answer to that question would have been yeah. Yep.
Thank you very much for that. Any other points to throw in there? We good? Okay.
Well, I just want to add on to what Dana was saying is that even though the investors, like, it depends on who's investing in your company. Maybe they want to have more of a say-so than another investor, so you have to work that out during the deal. But either way, when you're taking money from someone, they become your boss. So you're working for your investors. You're working to get their investment back. And even with the SBIR STTR program, even though it is non-dilutive funding, the government is still your boss. So you have reports that you have to do and milestones that you have to hit. So when you take outside money, just know that you have bosses, and your customers are also your boss.
And there's a huge difference when we talk about this with entrepreneurs in our incubator program all the time. There is good money and there's bad money. So bad money, to start with the downside example, is taking money from an investor whose incentives and priorities and mission are not aligned with yours. They have a different vision for where the company is going to go. And also, they're going to be calling you every 16 minutes because they want to know exactly what's happening. Bad investor, bad money. Good money is money from an investor who believes in you, believes in your mission, has some experience in the space that you're in, or some connections, or some relevant knowledge that will help you build your business, where their incentives are going to be aligned with yours. And ideally, you still don't have somebody calling you at every 16 minutes, but if you want to call them every 16 minutes, don't do that. They will make themselves available to be helpful to you. So Jamila is absolutely right. I've been on panels before where we've talked about the founder-investor relationship as dating. You can go really far down that rabbit hole, and I'm not going to. But you are getting into a long-term relationship. So when we invest in a company at a seed stage, we're expecting that we're going to be involved with that company for 5 to 7 years, if not longer. So from your perspective, if you're taking money from us, you are stuck with us for that period of time, if not longer. Things can happen along the way, but it's super important to ensure that you're getting into a long-term relationship with somebody who is going to add value to what you're doing and not detract value from what you're doing.
And so can I ask a question? Do you mind if I ask a question? Okay.
This is the easiest moderating job I've ever had.
Thank you, John. So, Dana, how important, because you say when you enter into a relationship, it's like dating the investor and the entrepreneur. So how important is it to like your investor and for the investor to like the innovator?
It is so important. Fundamentally, if an investor doesn't like the innovator, they're not going to invest. So building a personal relationship is really important, but it's super important for you from the innovator perspective to like your investor, because again, investors essentially have rights to information. They have rights to know what's going on. The specifics can vary depending on how you negotiate terms, how you negotiate a deal, but you are going to be interacting with these folks for a long time. If you don't like interacting with them, I would think very, very seriously about taking their money. And we can go down the dating analogy rabbit hole if you want to, but I think
I think we're running out of time.
Maybe we'll save that for the next panel. So I appreciate everything that everybody shared with us today, and we have a little bit of time left, and I kind of want to bring this home for each one of our panel members, and I'm going to ask this question in kind of two different ways, and you can answer it how you see fit. But either what are some of the biggest challenges, or perhaps the biggest challenge you see from some startups and early investors, or early innovators and entrepreneurs looking for investment? Or maybe another way of looking at this question is, if somebody in the audience today is thinking about all this stuff and you had one thing that they should walk away with, what might that be? And I'm going to put Jamila on the hot seat to go first.
Yeah, that's a great question, John. And I'm going to say that time and resources. Consider your time, consider how much resources you have. Because when you're at the point looking for outside funding, I'm going to assume that you're all in. You're 100% behind this idea. And so now you're racing against the clock because you have maybe a short runway. And cash flow is oxygen. I learned that early on, because when you don't have cash, it feels like you can't breathe. So when you're all in like that, that's where I see a lot of challenges lie for the innovator, is that they don't have enough runway to sustain them over time. They don't have enough runway to wait for that SBIR, STTR check. They don't have enough runway to wait for that investor to invest, because, like I said, fundraising can take a long time. Like, you can close the deal and then the investor has to do their due diligence, and sometimes it can take months for that first check to be written. So you have, in between that time, your company doesn't stop. You still have to produce. You still have to hit your milestones. You still have to show traction. So time and resources. And so if you can solve that problem for yourself, you're going to be well on your way to success.
That's fantastic advice. I guess two quick thoughts, one leading into the next. From a venture capital perspective or fundraising perspective, it is super tough. It's always challenging to raise money. It's really particularly hard right now. The economic conditions are such that check writing hasn't stopped in the venture world, but it is happening less, and it's happening more slowly. So in part because of that, and in part because of what I said towards the beginning of the panel, that venture capital isn't necessarily always the right form of financing, I guess I would encourage you, as a takeaway from this, to really think about how you want your business to grow, how you want the product to grow, where you want it to end up, what you see as your future in terms of building a market for your company or for your product, and in terms of building the company. And think about what sources of capital are out there, from SBIR and STTR to potentially other forms of non-dilutive financing to hopefully ultimately a lot of revenue. And think about what the right combination of financing sources is for your business to get it where you want it to go.
Thank you, Dana. Now, one of the things I'll say is time is money. And there are a lot of resources out there that cost you no money. One of the things I would say, just as far as the business aspect, SBA has the SCORE program, where it's a resource of advisors and treasure trove of information to learn about business, even market research, and a lot of other services that are available to you for free of charge. Also, we have our America Seed Fund Week next week, americaseedfund.us, learning more about SBIR STTR. But on top of that, outside of the programs that are being sponsored by SBA, I am the program manager for the Federal and State Technology Partnership Program. So what that is that it is a grant program, a competitive grant program, where basically we give money to competing state organizations, one per state, in order to develop programs to assist small businesses with the SBIR STTR process. So in addition to the events that we are giving, SBA, as well as in conjunction with our partners that established, many of our FAST organizations, currently there are 44 in 43 states and Puerto Rico, are hosting virtual events as well. So looking to what sort of free resources are available to you at small business development centers, at PTACs, in order to move your technology forward. You know, it keeps more money in your pocket to further develop your technology as well, so you can get to that SBIR stage, you can get to that further investment stage, angel investors, all the way up until commercialization as well.
Well, thank you very much. Eldon mentioned time, and we're about out of it. So please join me in thanking our amazing panel. I think y'all just did an excellent job, and I learned a lot. And